Are Democrats coming to the realization that there are some pretty hateful anti-Semites within their ranks, like at some pretty high levels? Sure seems that way. We're going to show you the evidence and show you the evidence that their own voters are turning on them because of it. Coming up right now. The fallout continues from that horrific Hamas terrorist attack. Now the numbers are over 800 innocent Israelis slaughtered. We're seeing the images, we're seeing verifications about just how bad the carnage was. Yes, including the decapitation of infants. And now here at home, we're starting to have a very serious conversation about who in this country has cloaked themselves in the banner of free Palestine and support the Palestinians, and what that actually looks like now that we see the after effects of this attack. We begin today, though, with a flashback. David Horowitz, an outspoken socialist turned conservative and American Jew, he appeared on a college campus, UC San Diego, over 10 years ago and had this exchange with a student.
Yes.
Good evening. I just wanted to say thank you for coming to campus tonight and presenting your point of view. It's always valuable to have two sets of views going on at the same time. Very useful. My name is Jumana Imad Musa Ahmed Al-Bahri, and I'm a student here at UCSD. I was reading your literature. I found that much more interesting than the talk. And I found some interesting things about the MSA, which is an organization that's very active on campus, and it is hosting our annual Hitler Youth Week. Should come out.
Okay, a couple quick things here. MSA is the Muslim Student Association. It still exists on multiple campuses. And this, of course, you have to understand, was about 10 years after the events of September 11th. And David Horowitz was exposing the fact that the MSA was funded by groups that have close ties to Hezbollah, Hamas, the terrorist regime in Iran, et cetera, Al-Qaeda at the time, et cetera, et cetera. And well, you just heard that her fabulous student association there is having a Hitler Youth Day. But now watch this exchange continue.
Out to those events. If you could clarify the connection between the MSA and jihad terrorist networks, because last I checked, we had to do our own fundraising, and we never get help from anyone. So if you could clarify the connection between UCSD's MSA, or if you don't have such information, if you could connect other MSAs on UC's, because the connection wasn't too clear in the pamphlet. Just if you could clarify.
Okay. Will you condemn Hamas here and now?
I'm sorry, what?
Will you condemn Hamas?
Would I condemn Hamas?
As a terrorist genocidal organization?
Are you asking me to put myself on a cross?
So you won't. I actually have had this experience many times. You didn't read the pamphlet because the pamphlet is chapter and verse. The main connection is that the MSA is part of the Muslim Brotherhood Network as revealed in the documents.
I don't think you understood what I meant by that. I meant if I say something, I'm sure that I will be arrested for reasons of Homeland Security. So if you could please just answer my question.
If you condemn Hamas, Homeland Security will arrest you.
If I support Hamas, because your question forces me to condemn Hamas. If I support Hamas, I look really bad.
If you don't condemn Hamas, obviously you support it. Case closed. I have had this experience. I had this experience at UC Santa Barbara where there were 50 members of the Muslim Students Association sitting right in the rows there. And throughout my hour talk, I kept asking them, will you condemn Hezbollah and Hamas? And none of them would. And then when the question period came, the president of the Muslim Students Association was the first person to ask questions. And I said, before you start, will you condemn Hezbollah? And he said, well, that question is too complicated for a yes-no answer. So I said, okay, I'll put it to you this way. I'm a Jew. The head of Hezbollah has said that he hopes that we will gather in Israel so he doesn't have to hunt us down globally. For it or against it?
For it.
Thank you. Thank you for coming and showing everybody what's here. and you're wearing a terrorist neckerchief.
If you understood,
You didn't hear the lady.
could you
ask a
please answer my question?
You get it. You don't get to make a speech. Yes, sir.
It's not often you actually see the face of evil staring straight back at you, calling for your assassination, for your murder, actually for the Holocaust of your entire people. That's what David Horowitz just faced in that exchange. Now, we start with that video today because there was a time in this country where pretty much everybody would see that and be appalled. Pretty much everyone across the board would see that, especially, again, remember, this was just about 10 years after the events of 9/11, would be absolutely nauseated by that exchange and terrified that this is a person who is a leader and organizer on a college campus. Republicans and Democrats alike, even if they don't agree with David Horowitz on everything, would actually stand up in solidarity with him, shoulder to shoulder with him, and say, that's despicable. This human being on a college campus, an American college campus in the state of California, just stood up, looked a man in the eye and said, yes, I wish you and every Jew would go to Israel so it would be easier to round you up and kill you all. And so now here we are today. And it leads us to Jake Tapper. Jake Tapper on CNN yesterday faced a bit of a slow developing realization of something that, well, frankly, many of us in the political right and the conservative media have been witnessing for quite some time. Jake Tapper, though, over at CNN, it's just occurring to him.
These last few days have been a real eye-opening period for a lot of people, a lot of Democrats, a lot of progressives, in terms of anti-Semitism on the left. A lot of people who seem more shocked at dehumanizing language used by world leaders to describe Hamas than what Hamas actually perpetrated on Saturday.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Jake. Welcome aboard. I don't want to dunk on him, but I kind of will dunk on him because he seems so shocked that progressives, I mean, we're the good guys. You know, we just don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. We're tolerant of everybody, but you see, we've seen from our perspective, because we've been the target of the progressives' intolerance in this country. We've been on the receiving end of it, and we can see the hypocrisy. We've seen it play out right before our very eyes. But Jake Tapper is just a teleprompter reader over at CNN, and I'm glad that he's starting to realize that maybe he's one of the baddies. But he doesn't have the kind of power that a sitting congresswoman does. Rashida Tlaib, who last I checked still has a Palestine flag out in front of her office door in the halls of Congress, and we'll get to that in a moment. She finally emerged after putting out a statement after the terrorist attacks, basically blaming Israel. And in the halls of Congress, these are the tunnels underneath the Cannon Building and the Capitol Building, a Fox News reporter chased her down and asked her some pretty simple questions. Can you condemn the slaughter of innocent babies? Again, go back to the flashback with David Horowitz. 10 years ago, pretty easy stuff for anyone in Congress, even Anthony Weiner.
Terrorists have cut off babies' heads and burned children alive. Do you support Israel's rights to defend themselves against this brutality?
We're just going to go through here.
You can't comment about Hamas terrorists chopping off babies' heads? Congresswoman, do you have a comment on Hamas terrorists chopping off babies' heads? You have nothing to say about Hamas terrorists chopping off babies' heads? Do you condone what Hamas has done, chopping off babies' heads, burning children alive, raping women in the street? You have no comment about children's heads being chopped off? Congressman, why do you have a Palestinian flag outside your office if you do not condone what Hamas terrorists have done to Israel? Do Israeli lives not matter to you?
Is it too soon to give out the Pulitzer for broadcast journalism? in that 1 minute and 10 seconds. That was probably the most powerful political video of the year. And I almost got emotional. I am getting emotional because it's impossible to watch that and not feel some level of rage. Or it's a combination of that and complete cognitive dissonance that I live in the same country under the same flag with the same freedoms and the same founding principles as that congressperson, a person elected to Congress as a member of the U.S. Representatives. How hard is it to just stop in the middle of that corridor, turn, look at the camera and say, of course, I condemn all of these things. Of course, I'm a human being. There is no rationale or excuse for any of these atrocities. Of course, my heart breaks for the families who have lost loved ones. Of course, it's so easy. She could have even ended by saying, that said, the political situation in the Middle East is an incredibly complex one and can't just be summed up by, it's kind of bull that she could put on there. But at the very least, how hard is it to do that? And she couldn't. She couldn't do it. Her colleague, Representative Dan Goldman of New York, he's sort of the favorite it boy for the Democrats. And here's why. He's a freshman. He's self-funded. He's in a safe district, and he can pretty much say whatever he wants, and he'll keep his seat. So they love him. I'll give him kudos for sitting with Fox News Channel, at least, which is, again, evidence that he can say whatever he wants. It doesn't matter. He can even go on Fox, and he'll still get reelected in his district. He was asked about
support for the Palestinians.
You have protests in New York City where they have swastikas. When you have even your colleague, respectfully, Rashida Tlaib, has not been as forceful against what's happening. How do you go back to the Hill and try to get them to rally for the Israeli people?
Look, there are fringe parts of many different parties. There are conservative marches in the South with swastikas all the time. Anti-Semitism is rampant.
100%. So what do you say to your party? What do you say to?
I've had conversations with them, and Representative Ocasio-Cortez has condemned both that rally and the Hamas attacks. And what we're talking about here is terrorism.
Yeah, a couple of things here, and by the way, I'm no fan of the Confederate flag either, and such. But the equivocation here is pretty nauseating and despicable. And again, he couldn't even bring himself. There are some fringe members of the party. He couldn't bring it. Say her name, Congressman Rashida Tlaib. And forgive me, Lawrence is a great guy, and I like him, but he sort of soft pedaled it by saying she hasn't been as forceful in criticism. She hasn't said anything in criticism. She said only things in support. But to this point of Confederate flags, let's just say it. He's right. There are people on the political right in this country who have a fascination with the Confederate flag and still think that the Civil War was about states' rights. And, well, sure, states' rights to do what, guys? Come on. Et cetera, et cetera. But hold on a second. We're having this conversation today after an atrocity, an act of war, of barbarism, a violation of war crimes that has left over 800 people murdered, including babies, women raped, thousands of people injured. And that's the moment where you rethink the display of certain symbols and flags and items. Do you remember the church shooting in Charleston, South Carolina, where one insane racist maniac went in and killed, I believe, 8 people in a black church? What was the reaction? Governor Nikki Haley of South Carolina called for the removal of the Confederate flag, to much criticism within her own party. Most Republican politicians actually stood up without any equivocation, condemned the murders, stood shoulder to shoulder with the victims, and yes, in many cases, called for the removal of those flags. So don't sit up there and say, well, you guys have your own problem with the flags. Yeah, you know what? When evil is done in the name of those symbols, we actually are called to reflect on those symbols and do something about it, and we have. Which brings us to Steny Ho. up until this last Congress, he was number 2 leader in the Democratic Party in Congress. And now he's asked about Rashida Tlaib.
Should your colleague Rashida Tlaib still have the Palestinian flag outside of her office?
I don't know what she's Palestinian. That doesn't mean she's a terrorist. It doesn't mean that she condones this. Rashida, I fly a Danish flag at my house. It doesn't mean what.
Have you been supportive of her comments?
I disagree with some of her comments. She lamented the death on both sides, and I think she condemned. I don't have her statement right in front of me, but she condemned terrorist activity.
No, she didn't. He's confusing her with AOC. I guess all those squad members look alike to Steny Ho. I fly the Danish flag in front of my house. First of all, the next act of barbarous Denmark terrorism that we see, I doubt he'll have that flag flying proudly outside his house. I do like this first response, though, and the attitude in his face.
I don't know what she's Palestinian.
Why does she have a Palestinian flag? I don't know. She's Palestinian. What do you expect? Those people. Is that what he's saying here? The I fly a Danish flag in front of my house argument really doesn't work here for the first reason that I just laid out there. Secondly, your private residence is a lot different than the official office that you hold in the federal government as a representative of the U.S. House of Representatives. Rashida Tlaib's office has a Palestinian flag, first and foremost, front and center. Then there's maybe a flag of Michigan. I think there's a gay rights flag, which I always like when the gay rights flags are flown right next to the Palestinian flags. I've got an idea. How about a new rule? New rule? Bill Maher always likes his new rules. I've got a new rule. In fact, maybe we should make this a law. How about the only flags flying outside of official federal government offices should be affiliated with the United States of America? Steny Ho knows that. That's why he referenced his Danish flag at his home, not at his office. You have a U.S. flag. You have a state flag. You can have a Gadsden flag. You can have a flag of the military. You can have a flag. You can have a POWMIA flag. Have a flag that is considered an American flag. And let's just leave it at that. Problem solved. Meanwhile, I suppose you could have a Black Lives Matters flag too. Do they have flags? I know they've got yard signs. I see them all the time in my neighborhood. Black Lives Matters has shown their true colors. And when I say true colors, I mean, again, the colors that we've all seen. You catch the theme of today's program? Democrats are starting to face this now, the realization of things that we've seen for quite some time. Our friends at Twitchy have a great summary of this. The Black Lives Matter Chicago chapter put out a tweet in support of Hamas, but it's worse than that. Believe it or not, that underplays how diabolical this message was from Black Lives Matter Chicago. Here's the graphic. Our pal Julio Rosas put it out there. I stand with Palestine. The image of a person paratrooping in with a Palestinian flag. That's like having an image of a 747 going into the World Trade Center and saying, I stand with Al-Qaeda. But utilizing this graphic showing a murderer about to land and take out his gun and start slaughtering people. It goes well beyond just I stand with Palestine. They are we have said, and I believe it is absolutely irrefutable, logical, reasonable fact that if you say at this moment in time in history, I stand with Palestine, free Palestine, and the occupation, that you are basically saying, I stand with the terrorists. But here, there's really no doubt, because they literally are celebrating a man flying in on a parachute who is about to kill people. Why else use that image? That's who Black Lives Matter is. And I guess it makes sense, because if you think about it, Black Lives Matter enriched themselves and gained power with sort of the preamble of what we saw this weekend. Oh, sure, they didn't slaughter and behead babies. They didn't rape people in their protests. No, they just burned down stores, burned down buildings, defaced property, looted. Yeah, there were a few deaths, fiery but mostly peaceful. I mean, Black Lives Matter, in terms of their tactics in the summer of 2020 to gain the money, influence, and power that they gained, is basically a very short hop, skip, and a jump to what Hamas is trying to achieve now for their money, power, and gain and influence. The reactions, thankfully, from most people were pretty strong. But I bring you back to, Jake Tapper. In the same way that Jake Tapper is shocked to see anti-Semitism on the left and progressive organizations. How about Black Lives Matter? How about all of the people? Last I checked, pretty much everybody at CNN, took a knee or raised a fist and did a hands up, don't shoot, and all the other lies that went along with Black Lives Matter. In unanimity, they celebrated. On ESPN, they just did a whole special broadcast on a sports network celebrating Black Lives Matter. The NFL still have Black Lives Matter emblazoned on the end zone of their field. Well, when I go to a football game now, and when I see Black Lives Matter, that's the image I'll think of. That's the image I'll think of. If you stand with Black Lives Matter, you stand with Palestine, you stand with the guy flying in on a parachute about to slaughter innocent babies. And here in Washington, D.C., the mayor of D.C., Muriel Bowser, during the summer of 2020, she painted on a street right 2 blocks away from the White House a giant mural, block lettering, Black Lives Matter. It's still there. It's still there. And now every time someone who lives in this city sees that, anytime a tourist, an American citizen who visits this city for the purpose of visiting their austere national capital, or maybe to petition their government and talk to their representatives, they'll have to walk by that and they'll say, oh, our national capital supports the group that supports the terrorists. Maybe it's time to rethink. Maybe it's time to rethink support for Black Lives Matter and all of the outward signs that our elected officials, through their virtue signaling, have inflicted upon us. And make no mistake, it was all virtue signaling, and it was all for their own political power. Black Lives Matter did what they did in the summer of 2020 for their own influence, power, and money. But the Democrats who embraced them, lifted them up, and used them, they did it for their political gain and for their political power. Because if you weren't with Black Lives Matter, you were a racist, and then that meant you were voting for Donald Trump. That was the message. And it intimidated people. It intimidated people to vote for Democrats so that they wouldn't be called racist. All right, let's move to the State Department. The Biden State Department, who rode into office on the power of Black Lives Matter and their support of terrorists, they are now asked in no uncertain terms about the fungible aspect of the $6 billion they just gave Iran. And of course, we know Iran helped coordinate this attack. So isn't there blood on the hands of the Biden administration? Isn't this blood money that Biden and Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, and Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, isn't this blood money that they just handed over? And why don't they freeze it now? They can still freeze it. They keep saying, well, Iran hasn't gotten the money yet. Okay, then freeze it. Bring it back. And they refuse to commit to that. And so now we have a very, very frank question, very simple question about that money.
You guys are saying, yes, maybe that specific dollar with that serial note, the serial number, or that euro with that serial number on it can't be used to fund terrorism. But the fact of the matter is, and you guys know this, is that it allows or it frees up money that Iran has already inside its own country to use for other things. So they don't have to spend that money on non-sanctioned items.
Let me say 2 things about that. One,
all right, what are we going to get here? Are we going to get a lie? Are we going to get an equivocation? Are we going to get an excuse? Are we going to get a bullet point? Or are they going to point the finger somewhere else? This is a fun game. Let's see. What do you think?
the reason I read this exact quote is I have heard a fair bit of criticism about this money, including from the person who said this in November of 2018. And I thought it's fair to point out that this money was first allowed to accrue into these accounts under the Trump administration. And that's a point you
back
did
then as well.
You did, and there are a number of people who have had a lot to say about this the last few days who have conveniently forgot that fact, which is why I thought it was important to remind.
Well, we have our answer. They're pointing the finger. Apparently, it's all Trump's fault. That's right. Trump made Joe Biden hand $6 billion over to Iran, who then funded the Hamas terror attack. Basically, Trump killed all of those innocent Israelis. That's the line from the State Department. The moment you think that they aren't shameless enough, they outdo themselves.
Remind the world. The second thing I will say is that Iran has, of course, always funded terrorism. They have always funded malign activities in the region, and that's why we have always taken action to hold them account. But this money can only be used for humanitarian purposes. Not a cent of it has been spent at this point, and we have the ability to freeze it at any time.
That is not the criticism that you're getting. The criticism you're getting is that this frees up money inside Iran that they can use for malign purposes, as you said.
And there is just no evidence that that is accurate. When we have
Well,
seen,
is there
when we
any
have seen,
evidence
when we
that
have
isn't
seen,
accurate?
when we have the evidence. So
you say that there's no evidence that Iran has used money over the course of the last month or month and a half since the money arrived, since the money arrived in Qatar, to send to Hamas. Can you say
Iran
that?
has funded terrorism before these accounts were established during the Trump administration. They have funded terrorism after these accounts were established in the Trump administration. They will no doubt continue to fund terrorism in the future, which is why we have sought to hold them accountable. With respect to this money, it cannot be used for anything but humanitarian purposes.
So they think you're stupid. That's the bottom line here. They think you're stupid. And by the way, I'm guessing this guy's from Yale or Harvard. You need to have an Ivy League education to be so stupid as to actually follow this train of logic. Iran's always funded terrorism, and they probably always will. But it was a good thing we gave them $6 billion. And there's no evidence that this $6 billion will in any way be used for terrorist acts or allow the government of Iran to spend other money on terrorist attacks, because they don't have to spend their money on the things that this $6 billion will be spent for. And if you agree with that, if you believe that, if that makes sense to you, you're a moron, or you've got an advanced degree from an Ivy League school, or both. All right, moving on, if we could. Andrea Mitchell, MSNBC, talking to a mother in Israel. Honestly, this doesn't even need much commentary. I'll let it speak for itself. This is the American media in all of its glory.
I'm sure you want them to be with people they know so that they're not alone there. But what are your feelings about the attacks against Gaza right now? How can the government...
I'm sorry, I got to stop. I said it wouldn't be much commentary, but when you look at the Chiron, Israeli mother recounts her son's kidnapping. Okay, so this is a mother. Put yourself in her place for a second. I'm getting really emotional in today's show because I am so empathetic to this woman and so angry at Andrea Mitchell and MSNBC and NBC News. Imagine being this woman doing a satellite connection to American television to try to get the word out about your son who's been kidnapped by these people, and you know what's happening to him. You know in vivid detail what is happening to your son, to your baby boy. But you want to get this word out because you want the world to know. And Andrea Mitchell's question is, how do you feel about the attacks on Gaza? How do you feel about the retaliation against the people who have done this to your son? And she asks it in such a way it's like, well, I mean, aren't you just as guilty? This makes me want to spit blood out of my eyes, if that's a thing.
You're looking for a symmetrical situation, and I must say, it isn't. If you were dealing with a war who is between two countries don't take children hostages. I'm sorry. It's against the laws of war. It's against humanity. It's against anything that we all believe in. Every time we had missiles shot at us, I used to say to my children that they should be sympathetic towards the children of Gaza because they suffer a lot more than they do. I'm not sure I still believe in it now. And I must say the only worry I have now from the bombings in Gaza is the fact that my children are there. I can't be sympathetic anymore. I can't be sympathetic to animal human beings. Well, they're not really human beings who came into my house, broke everything, stole everything, took my children from their bedrooms and took them to the Gaza Strip. Israel never done that and will never do. So there is no symmetry. I'm sorry.
Do you want the government?
I'm sorry for being so emotional.
Do you want the government to put the top priority on getting the hostages out before they retaliate?
I want my government to put it on the first priority, and I want the world to put it on first priority. I think any mother in the world should try and imagine her children under that situation and then think again. That's all I want. I want the world to ask them to release children, to release elderlies, to release the civilians they took. There is no reason to hold them there. They are not soldiers, they are not part of the war, and they have nothing to do with it. We gave them work permits. We really believed that this was the way to move their economy, to reconnect these two so-called countries. This is not the way a country behaves. This is a way that a terror organization behaves.
Wow. Incredibly. I have so much admiration for that woman. I don't know if I would have been able to hold together as well as she did in the face of that. And you wonder what the producers and writers and executives at NBC News are saying to themselves while that's unfolding before their eyes. Do they realize that they're on the wrong side of these things? Does Andrea Mitchell have any sort of self-awareness? I don't think so. But did you hear that at the very end there, what she said? And I just want to play it one more time for you. It's so incredibly important. It goes with the theme of today's show.
Billions they took. There is no reason to hold them there. They are not soldiers. They are not part of the war, and they have nothing to do with it. We gave them work permits. We really believed that this was the way.
Listen to the tone in her voice, the incredulous, the desperation, the anger, and the emotion. That we worked with them. We gave them their boundaries. We got out of Gaza. We let them elect their leadership. We gave them work permits so that they could come in here and work on our country. We were sold on the idea that this is how we get peace. We were sold on the idea that this is what we are supposed to do. I have a hunch that she's probably not even, a conservative. She probably didn't even vote for Benjamin Netanyahu because she bought into the idea that we need to have a two-state solution and we need to have peace and we need to help them out and they're our brothers and let's just do this. We're part of the problem. And look at what she has to endure now. I think this is a realization for so many people on the left who deluded themselves about the reality of the situation here, which brings us to Senator Edmund Markey of Massachusetts. Now, Massachusetts is probably the most reliable liberal Democrat states in the country. I think other than 1984, they have voted for a Democrat president for the last 70 years. They have two senators. Ed Markey is right there at the microphone. And Elizabeth Warren, you know her from the Land O'Lakes Carton. She's on the right side there. And they're making an appearance and giving a speech acknowledging the horrors in Israel to the assembled masses there. And listen to this passage here.
There must be a de-escalation of the current violence. The United States should... There must be.
All right. We're gonna watch this again. But I want to give you a couple of things to look for. So he's calling for a de-escalation in violence, which means Israel surrender, Israel stand down. Israel has no right to not only defend themselves, but to retaliate and to kill the people who killed those innocent civilians. De-escalation is surrender talk. De-escalation is Israel's doing the wrong thing right now. This has been chapter and verse for the liberal left in America and Western Europe for the last 30, 40 years. And maybe it changes now. Maybe this is the moment where it changes, where they actually get it and they realize the reality of the situation down there. De-escalation is something that, as you heard from the crowd there, is not really on the minds of the people who are worried about the reality of Israel and their survival. I'm going to play it again, and this time, blown up. I want you to look at his face. I want you to look at Ed Markey's face. I want you to look at the face of the gentleman in the red tie, just to his, just off his, as you're looking at the screen, right shoulder. I want you to look at Elizabeth Warren. They are so stunned because they live in such a progressive bubble that they literally believe that everyone else agrees with their pablum. Everybody agrees with what they know is right. After all, they went to Harvard.
There must be a de-escalation of the current violence. The United States should.
Look at that face. Look at that face. Look at Warren. Look at them looking at each other, raising their eyebrows. Look at how shocked and stunned he is.
There must.
Talk about a wake-up call. Now, I doubt Ed Markey is ever going to change his opinion on things. He's funded by way too many anti-Israeli groups. But in that moment, that flash across his face when he realized, wait a minute, everyone doesn't agree with me? Which brings us finally to Bari Weiss. We're going to let her have the last word. Morning Joe yesterday. Bari Weiss is formerly a woman of the left. She was a liberal Democrat, wrote for the New York Times. She got drummed out of the New York Times because she started to question some of the progressive heterodox positions that you had to agree with, things that, well, again, what we've been showing you today. Bari Weiss got there, and we call it red-pilled. Although I don't think Bari Weiss is anything close to a conservative. But when you start to actually get yourself outside of the progressive liberal Democrat bubble in the media, academia, and in politics, and you start to see, wait a minute, we were wrong. And by the way, we're the intolerant ones. We're on the side of the bigots. We're on the side of the terrorists. Bari Weiss got there about 2 years ago. Everyone else on today's program, I think that they're moving in a Bari Weiss direction. So that's why it's appropriate that she have the last word.
This is the biggest massacre of the Jewish people since the Holocaust. But unlike the Holocaust, in which the Germans tried to hide their war crimes, it took the Allies, remember, years to uncover all that the Nazis did. Here we have people streaming it on real time, on TikTok, on live stream, and on Instagram. A message just went out to parents all over the state of Israel, begging them to delete the apps from their children's phones because Hamas has warned that it is going to live stream the execution of hostages, and they don't want their children seeing it. I want to tell you just a few stories of some of the people that I've been speaking to in Israel, people who are desperate for their family members to come home. I spoke yesterday morning to Shaked Haran. Shaked is a young mother of 2. She is 8 months pregnant with her 3rd child. On Saturday morning, she got a WhatsApp message from her father and from her father on Kibbutz Be'eri. They said that they were in trouble and they said that they loved her. This woman has 10 members of her family currently missing. Her father, her mother, her sister, her brother-in-law, 3 children. 3 children under the age of 10 are missing. The reason they know that they have not been killed is a friend of the father's kept calling his phone hundreds and hundreds of times. At some point, a voice picks up in Arabic and shouts, hostage, hostage, Gaza, Gilad Shalit. And people will remember that Gilad Shalit is the Israeli prisoner, the soldier that was held for more than 4 or 5 years and released in exchange for 1,000 prisoners, which gives you a sense of how Israel thinks of the importance of a single life. Another mother I spoke to, she asked that she remain anonymous because she is so scared that if her name is in public, it will make the lives of her children who are held hostage even worse. She was on the phone with her boys aged 12 and 16 as they hid in a safe room on another kibbutz at the south, a few kilometers from Gaza. And she heard her youngest child, 12 years old, begging not to be taken because he said that he is too young. And she wants the world to know that this is not about an occupation. Israel does not occupy Gaza. It has not occupied Gaza since it pulled out almost a decade ago.
I want to make a quick comment here because it strikes me as I see MSNBC jumping to this 5-box shot. Every single person that you see on that screen, setting aside Barry Weiss for a moment, every single person that you can see on that screen, from the hosts and panelists at Morning Joe to Al Sharpton to Jonathan Greenblatt, the president of the Anti-Defamation League, formerly of the Obama administration, every single person on that screen has spent the last 7, 8, 9 years calling conservative Republicans Nazis because they support Donald Trump's economic and immigration policies. Every single person on that screen who is now looking so sober and so mournful and so emotional over what's unfolding right now in Israel, every single one of them called you a Nazi because you vote Republican. I just wanted to point that out.
Ruled by Hamas. She said, these are just teenagers like anyone's teenagers. I am just a mother like any mother who's watching this. I want to tell you about another person, Hirsch Goldberg Polin. He sent a text message to his parents at 8 a.m. on Saturday morning that said, I love you and I'm sorry. And they haven't heard from him since. They brought a toothbrush and his hair and his pillow to the police station in the hopes that they might find him. He was at the music festival like so many others, like Amit Tal. Someone on my team spoke to Amit Tal yesterday. He hid in a grapefruit grove for hours from the terrorists, and he dug a hole to shove his feet into the earth because he was scared that they would see his bright shoes. He describes what he saw as a slaughterhouse, that him and his friends were like sheep to be slaughtered. We now know that more than 250 bodies have been recovered from that music festival. The terrorists who filmed themselves came on paragliders with automatic rifles to slaughter and maim and mutilate as many people as possible. Women were raped at that music festival next to the dead bodies of their friends. The woman whose story I began with, Shaked Haran, 10% of that kibbutz where her family members were taken from, 10%, it is the literal meaning of the word decimated, were slaughtered. More than 100 bodies have been recovered from that kibbutz. I want to emphasize what Jonathan was saying before. This is not a situation with two sides, with militants versus an army. The two sides in what just happened over the past 72 hours is the side of rapist, barbaric people who we are now learning beheaded babies versus innocent people. That is what is going on here. And anyone who is found cheering, celebrating in the streets of London or Paris or Berlin or New York or Sydney, where they are screaming, "Gas the Jews," they are not cheering for the liberation of the Palestinian people in Gaza who languish under the jackboot of Hamas. They are cheering for barbarism and bloodshed. And we should be absolutely clear about what is going on here.
Great stuff. And it should be noted, one final word, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib of the Democratic Party, representing a district in Michigan, decided Detroit. She still can't find herself to say the words, "I condemn," all of those actions that Barry Weiss just laid out. That is it for today's show. I appreciate you sticking with us through it. Please like and share and subscribe, and I don't know, have a cocktail. We'll see you back tomorrow. I'm Larry O'Connor. Thanks for joining us.